Hey, welcome to my channel. My name is Bridget and I'm here to give you the confidence you need to make the artwork of your dreams. In this video, I show everything you need to make a watercolor painting. Here are most things you need laid out. Water in a container, watercolor paints, a variety of brushes, and of course, watercolor paper. You will also need painter's tape and paper towel. For other effects, you could also use salt, and I'll show you how. Watercolor paints usually come in a palette like this, where the paints are dry. If you expect them to work like acrylic, you would think that there is not a lot of paint here. But the thing is, these paints are not like acrylic at all. With these, you just add water and make a puddle, and then you take paint from that puddle. Don't dig into the paint, and don't make a sludge texture. You want to make a puddle. If you happen to buy watercolor paints in small tubes, I recommend getting a hard plastic palette, not a tearaway palette, to use. When you use watercolor from the tubes, they're going to look very similar to acrylic paint. But again, they're in small tubes for a reason. You do not need a lot by any means, you just need to add water. And when it dries on your palette, you can re-wet it and use it again. That's the beauty of watercolor. You can use this same principle to fix small mistakes. If you have gotten watercolor paint on a part of your piece that you did not want to, take a little bit of water on your brush and rub it away, and then dab it up with a paper towel. To mix watercolors, start with the lightest colors you want to use first, and rinse your brush every time you switch colors. You can experiment with the ratios of pigment and water. For example, if you want to mix green, put yellow on your palette first and then blue. Add water and swirl it around. If you want to make a color lighter, there is no white for watercolor, because your paper actually becomes the white that you would need. So to make a color lighter, you would just add water. This is a wet on dry technique. The brush or paint is wet and the paper is dry. Adding the orange is wet on wet. To get the typical watercolor effect, you will use a wet on wet technique, using a wet brush on wet paper. Watercolor paint is the least forgiving of all the paint types. It takes a lot of practice, and even I don't consider myself an expert, and I've been doing watercolor since I was little. That being said, you can still make beautiful art without doing the techniques perfectly. Watercolor teaches us to work with our mistakes, and the importance of perseverance. It takes practice. The fun of watercolor is watching how the water works. Really, it does the work for you. A little touch, and it can spread very far. Watercolor will also bleed together as it spreads, and it will bleed out throughout the paper. You can use this to your advantage to make beautiful night skies or sunsets or even lake paintings. Here you can see the difference between using a dry brush on dry paper versus a wet brush on dry paper. Salt makes a starry effect because it absorbs and repels the water, leaving the space underneath it white. Wait for the paint to dry before removing the salt. You can also move the paper around to watch how the water moves on the paper. This is why it's important to tape down your paper, and why it's important to make sure your tape is evenly spaced all the way around. It will create a border which will add to the overall look of your piece. That's it for this video. I hope you found it helpful. Subscribe if you want to see more, and turn on notifications so you don't miss an upload. Also, leave a comment below if you have any questions. Thanks for watching!